And okay.
Got it.
Hi, Jess. Welcome to the AAPI month PAL celebratory interview. What we're just trying to do is reach out to several people within the AAPI community and just elevate their voices, make sure that they are given space to speak about things that they think are important within the pro-life community. And we really appreciate having you on. Would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is Jess Meath, and oh gosh, my pro-life journey really begins when I was adopted from China
Okay.
because of the one child policy. And I also have a very interesting angle because not only was I was adopted and raised by a single mom.
Oh, wow.
So in that
Okay.
regard, I feel like I have a very unique perspective, especially when it pertains to the pro-life movement, adoption, and motherhood.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. Can you elaborate maybe on your mom's journey with being able to adopt? Did she find any barriers because she was single,
Yeah.
or would you like to explain maybe a little bit
I was
more?
actually talking to her about this the other day. This was I was adopted in March 1996, and I actually don't know my real birthday. So they
Okay.
estimate that I was around 6 or 7 months. So every baby in my adoption group was given September 1st as a birthday. The
Oh,
years may
wow.
have been different, but it was very smooth, very, I would say, relatively easy and simple in that
Okay.
regard, just because I believe the 90s, there was a huge adoption boom in China, especially for baby girls. But I believe today, it's much harder to adopt. I'm not sure on this, so I'd have to do more research. But I believe that if you want to, or I'm not sure if this was even the case in the 90s when I was adopted, but I believe for a male, they had to have special needs.
Oh, wow.
But
Okay.
my mom did say, and I just read throughout the news that adopting a baby from China has gotten more difficult. I think
Okay.
one of those reasons is when my mom adopted me, I was already granted US citizenship, but I
Really?
believe now you have to um it's not granted. I think you have to, when you get back to the United States or whatever country you're adopting from, you have
Mhm.
to like apply for citizenship.
Yeah, I can imagine with a lot of the dialogue politically that has been going on with immigration, I can understand
Yeah.
maybe how there would
Yeah.
be more barriers that would affect international adoption coming over time. So that's
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting. Wow, that's
Yeah.
really interesting. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when she was actually the only single mother in the adoption group. A lot of
Okay.
the couples adopting were struggling with infertility, but they were relatively older parents. So
Yeah.
um but my mom never felt like stigmatized or had an issue with the adoption process being a single woman. I
Yeah.
guess it was just she was one of the few. I'm not sure how it is today with that going forward, but um no, it was relatively simple for her, relatively easy. It went very smoothly.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a very unique experience. I haven't actually heard of very many people who are single parents who adopted. I know a lot of different people who were adopted from China during the one child policy era. So that kind of makes a lot
Hmm.
of sense. Obviously, if you're only able to have one child in your household without, like, obviously there's
Yeah.
exceptions, but those children have to go somewhere. They have to have homes and families to care for them. So
Yeah.
that's always
Yeah.
interesting. That's an interesting conversation.
And now it's two children. So I'm not sure as
Mm,
far as adoption goes, if it's like
okay.
increased, if it's decreased. So that would be something that I would definitely need to research. But
Yeah. Do
mm,
you feel any like connection or any specific like deep understanding of like your identity in terms of your heritage, or do you feel more distant from it?
oh gosh, since I was so young when I was adopted, I really have no recollection of my birth parents or China.
Hmm.
Um, so for all intents and purposes, I say that I am Chinese, but I'm culturally very Western, very
Okay.
American. I don't speak any Chinese. Um, I was, oh gosh, I always like jokingly say that if my mom and my like immediate family were not Caucasian, I would like not know that they weren't like that I'm technically not blood related.
Yeah.
We look so different, so it's very obvious. But um they raised me. I call my mom mom, I call my brother,
Yeah.
so they're my family. But
Yeah.
I always wonder, I would love to go back to learning about Chinese culture, Asian culture, just because, to be completely honest, I really am not educated on any of that.
Okay.
Um, but
Yeah,
it's
and
something
that's
I'm
okay.
definitely
Yeah.
interested in exploring.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've had this conversation with a few different people, especially when it comes to international adoption. There is like a need I feel from a lot of people to like try to like understand maybe their identity, but would you say that you're more like at peace with how you understand your relationship to the world around you and your family and your cultural background?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think it's so interesting too, because when I think about international adoption, and I have friends who are also adopted from China. So it's very interesting to hear their perspectives. And some of them, it's very interesting. And so I definitely love having deeper conversations with them. Identify as pro-choice.
Oh,
So
really?
it's very
Okay.
like just interesting to hear their experiences and why they lean that way,
Oh,
especially
wow.
coming from an
Yeah.
adoption perspective.
I mean, when you're having these dialogues with them, do they understand your perspective as a pro-life person coming from that background, or do you think they don't understand your perspective?
Oh
Because it sounds
gosh,
like you
I
understand
think
theirs.
yeah, yeah. And I will say too that abortion is a very divisive, very contentious
Mhm.
discussion and debate in our country right now, especially since Roe v. Wade has been overturned. So, oh gosh, I think it also helps too that just my natural disposition is empathetic, and just I
Yeah.
tend to listen and just tend to be more like peaceful when it comes to these conversations. And I think the people that I personally know are kind of at that level too. I think, and that's
Yeah.
another point to touch on is all we really see in the media are like the intense confrontations. But I
Mhm.
would say actually a majority of the country is not, doesn't typically talk or listen or speak to others in that way. I would say it's generally like more very, what we don't see is the more
Yeah.
civil conversations. But I would say for the most part, it's been pretty respectful. A lot of it is like questioning. It's not really, and I don't really want to, tell them to feel a certain way. And I think they kind of approach it too, that we just have different perspectives. And
Yeah.
how can I like understand theirs? Maybe we don't necessarily have to agree, but more coming from the point of, adoption and even like foster care and even rape and all of these very
Yeah.
sensitive topics when it comes to abortion. They just need to be approached with a lot of like empathy.
Yes.
And so it's been very like humbling just to have discussions with so many different people who have gone through very sensitive and I would even say traumatic events in their lives, of
Yeah.
how it feels to them, and how it changes their perspective and how they why they lean the way that they do.
Yeah. I think that's really awesome that you're able to have that type of empathy and understand others' perspectives, even if you don't necessarily agree with those perspectives. And also that you don't try to demonize people who disagree with you, especially people who are coming from a very similar perspective to yours. So,
Yeah, yeah.
wow, that's really mature of you. And a lot of people honestly don't really have that type of mindset. That's why people avoid conversations like the abortion conversation. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's more so too of at the end of the day, I'm not really here to change their mind, but maybe, just planting the seed for them to maybe see things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Um, or, even just finding common ground and middle ground. And if you look hard enough, it's always there. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
just kind of focusing in on that perspective. And, it's hard because at the end of the day, um, we are pro-life because biology tells us, right? Like
Yeah.
ethics, and then we go deep into philosophy, like there's so many different points that can be made. I don't really like to say argued, but
Yeah.
I can't think of a better word other than argued, so I'm just going to use it. But just kind of opening that conversation too, that it's a human life.
Yeah.
And so, to be empathetic and to be understanding, but also to not be afraid to be bold and to remain unwavering in, defending unborn lives,
Yeah.
is so important, that we have to, use our voices for those who don't have, for those who can't speak for themselves. So it's just about like finding that balance of having conviction, but
Yeah.
having conviction with a soft and gentle heart.
Yes. Yes. I love that language that you're using. Conviction with a soft and gentle heart. That is such a beautiful teaching. Wow. I hopefully hopefully people who are watching this who are more on the confrontational side can kind of hear that, and maybe that can soften their hearts, because I've noticed that more meaningful conversations that actually like bear fruit come from the more calm and like empathetic and like retrospective side of things, instead of the like screaming in people's face, like,
Yeah.
pal, like we're always here to scream, but but there definitely is obviously a place for that, but there's also a place
Yeah.
in most interactions for like peace and
Yeah.
empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely think, don't get me wrong, there's, a place for boldness and making a statement.
Mhm.
And just doing so like peacefully. I think that's where
Yeah.
it comes down to, because when it's so like interesting too, and I love our pro-choice brothers and sisters, right? Always have respect, always treat people, with dignity, no matter where they stand on the legality of abortion. But
Yes.
it's like
Yeah.
so interesting of like, I was just like reflecting on this the other day of like how things are just portrayed, of like pro-choice can be very ballsy. Like there's
Yeah.
statements too. So it's like, I feel like too, in some regard, there's just a double standard of like, we do things like, if the pro-life movement does something that's bold, but does it in a peaceful way, the reception of it is just like very like eye-opening to like look at and see, oh my gosh, but at the same time, the pro-choice movement, yeah, they're like very similar.
Hmm.
They're like using a similar style.
Yeah.
So, and it seems to be like, especially in the mainstream media, of like just how that's portrayed.
Yeah. I think we kind of run into that issue with us at PAL involving rescue. I don't know what your opinion on rescue is. I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing that publicly, on this you can, but you don't have to. But we kind of run into the same issue where like nonviolent protest that is like very disruptive of the incident that we are against is like demonized in the media when we do it, but when other groups of people and especially pro-choicers do it, like you have like pro-choicers going into Catholic churches and like literally like
Yeah.
getting
And it's
naked,
like
like
justified.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
demonization. I agree with you. That does happen on
And it's
our end.
it's just like,
Yeah.
and no matter where, if in the pro-life movement of where you stand on rescue or not, I just like, I always think of just the portrayal of it, of
Yeah.
like, it's just, oh gosh, like, I don't want to say unfair, because
Mhm.
I feel like there's a very like strong word, but I don't know what other word to use. I would
Yeah.
say like just being on like the receiving end of it. And I will go to say that like, even, oh gosh, I'm sure Pal would stand on this too, but just nonviolent action from both sides, right? Like, if, oh God forbid, if there was violence on the pro-life movement side, like we cannot condone that
Yeah.
ever. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just, you know, I don't I don't want any side to have like a double standard.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that's an amazing mindset that we can all have that fosters democracy. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that you're of that perspective and you're able to share that. I want to ask you, when did you realize that you were pro-life? Like what brought you to the realization of wanting to fight for the preborn, realizing their personhood? What brought you there?
Oh gosh. And so what's also very interesting is my immediate family and pretty much my extended family, for the most part, identify and they lean to being pro-choice. Even
Really?
my mom who adopted me. So it's like very
Wow.
interesting to
Okay.
kind of, I wasn't like raised to lean that way. I would say I was raised to be a free thinker, to think for myself, to form my own opinions. But I will
Yeah.
say I was very like sheltered growing up. So it wasn't that, my school or even my family was trying to like withhold these issues from me. I just don't think they ever really like came up in discussion.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't until I went to Catholic high school, and I wasn't raised with any religion.
Okay.
Where like my first day of freshman year, like I remember my school did not hold back of, the issue of abortion and instilling, the student body with, life begins at conception,
Yeah.
and that we need to respect human life from conception to natural death. And I
Yeah.
remember my like, oh gosh, maybe it was the first week I was a freshman, and we prayed to an end to abortion. And I was like, what the heck is abortion? Like, I
Yeah.
didn't know, like I had no idea, and I didn't want to ask because I didn't everyone else seemed to like understand because that's kind of how they've been raised as cradle
Yeah.
Catholic. So I went home and I Googled it. And I just, at 15 years old, I was very disturbed. I
Mm.
was so disturbed of like what I saw. And mind you, I'm only 15 years old, not
Yeah.
having, not being taught whether to be pro-choice or pro-life.
Yeah.
So no like bias, I would say, or like no leaning towards one way or the other. But my
Mhm.
gut instinct told me this is horrible. We
Yeah.
absolutely need to end this. And how is this condoned? I remember even like pulling my mom in, and she was like, what did you just like, how did this happen? Like, and then she like hit her, like, you're 15, you are now old enough to really know what this is. So she explained it to me. But she didn't really have the pro-choice angle, even though that's how she leans. She just kind of told me honestly, kind of from like an objective perspective. I know that sounds weird because now that I'm pro-life, it's like, oh gosh, like in hindsight, I'm definitely wrestling with what she said. But it was more so, an abortion is when um like what you're seeing of just kind of told me, from a fact-based perspective of kind of like the what it like abortion policy in our country, kind of like
Yeah.
what that entails, but still not like leaning one way or the other. She never once said like, the Catholic Church is wrong on this. She was just more explaining the different viewpoints for me to
Yeah.
get those, which I thought was really great. Um, and so, but ever since that moment is kind of when I had that conviction. And that's where I say, like, even though I was enrolled at a Catholic high school, my faith isn't what informed me of the horrors that I saw.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, deep down, I think we all like, I always, and ever since that moment, I just always ask people as charitably as I can, if this is too horrible to look at, or if
Mm.
this is too horrible to talk about, it's too horrible to condone.
Mm.
We cannot
Amen.
allow it. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Per queen. That's a word.
Even
Wow.
okay, and like to be honest, even when pro-choice people will look at an abortion and the aftermath of that, they turn away. They can't see it. They can't look. And
Yeah.
so, if that's the case, how can you allow it or condone it? And then, it's just a tunnel of like the different, it's not a person or, so we're just going down a rabbit hole. But like at the baseline, if
Mhm.
something is too horrible to look at, you can't condone it.
Okay. So you would say you discovered abortion like in a vacuum and just by the very nature of it and just what you saw, like in a vacuum, no context, no, oh, we need this because this
Yeah.
reason or it's bad because X reason.
And I
Just,
wasn't even thinking about my
yeah,
adoption at that point. I
yeah,
was just looking at what I saw. And
yeah,
you know what? Like, granted, it is Google, but like, there's so much like back and forth of, oh gosh, and this breaks my heart too, of like, that's not what an abortion is. But like, it tells me that's what it is.
yeah,
And like, I was looking at different like websites, and different sources. And granted, I was only 15, but if that's enough to shake a 15-year-old, like it really cannot be. We really have to start defending human life and human
Yeah.
life in the womb specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say I had a very similar experience myself. I don't want to elaborate too much, but it was definitely more of a like a vacuum thing of like hearing about abortion and going, that doesn't sound right. Like when somebody explained to me, oh, an abortion is when somebody is pregnant and then they choose not to be, like one day they're not. I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like you, like where does the baby go? Like they, like even then at that
Yeah.
time, I knew that there was something there, something important, and then there's like an absence of that. Like how does that happen? Like you have to actively take that thing away in order for there to be an absence, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's like basic logic, you know. But like as a child,
Yeah.
even I was like, where did the baby go? What happened to the baby? You know?
Yeah. And
So
even at like
yeah.
such a young age, it's so interesting to see. I believe, oh gosh, many like pro-life activists, um, from a secular and religious sense, who have like younger siblings, like I would say like kindergarten or even um like toddlers who are just starting to talk. Like they'll show them a picture of a pregnant woman
Mm,
and they'll ask like what's that? And they say a
mhm.
baby. And
Yeah.
so it's not an unborn, it's not a fetus, it's not like an unborn child. Like even them are they are able to say, this is a baby, it's a child.
Yeah. Yeah. Do
So
you think
it's
there's like, oh, sorry.
oh no, no, no.
Do you think there's like societal conditioning that like we go through as we become adults where people start to like learn reasons to justify abortion? Do you
Oh
think,
gosh. I would say, yeah, absolutely. I think we're conditioned to essentially, and I know this is a strong word, but it's I'm not going to hesitate using it. It's dehumanizing, right?
mm,
A human
yeah,
life. And so when we use the words like fetus, embryo,
yeah,
zygote, it's just it's like scientifically, it's just a different stage of development,
yeah,
right? But I feel like in today's society, it's used as a way to dehumanize
hmm,
the personhood. And I get like, and I love, I'm sure you guys work with secular pro-life and like
yeah,
Equal Rights Institute,
yeah,
who like are much more eloquent in explaining this from like a scientific, biological, philosophical, ethical standpoint.
yeah,
But um it's just, oh gosh, yeah, I would definitely say that it's that like when we dehumanize like human life, and I get that a lot of the abortion debate is around like what constitutes maybe not when a human life begins, because I think a lot of people understand biologically, so I think the real issue is rooted in personhood,
yeah,
right, rather than like is it a human, like of
yeah,
course like people know it comes from the same species as us. Species, is it species
yeah,
or species, I never know, but I think that no one would disagree that it's a homo sapien,
yeah,
but it's more so rooted in personhood. And I think Equal Rights Institute, ERI, and Secular Pro Life are much better, like are really much more eloquent at explaining this. But
mhm,
yeah, personhood is definitely at the root of it. But even so, with that being personhood being at the center of it, there's a lot of dehumanization.
mhm,
And we see that, right? And I stand firm in this. This is not even me speaking as a Catholic. This is me speaking just as um a person who's been born.
yeah,
uh when we start um respecting human life from the moment it begins, and many people would not disagree that biologically it's at conception,
mhm,
we will see a transformation in how we respect human life every moment after birth.
yes,
Like it
wow,
has to be holistic.
yeah.
It has to be whole life.
Yeah. Wow. That is a really that's a really poignant perspective that I think we can take as pro-life people from every angle, like secular pro-life people, like you mentioned, religious pro-life people, us as minorities, as women, I think that
Yeah.
even as conservatives, Democrats, no matter where you are, you can understand that once we as a society start respecting the dignity of human beings from the very beginning, that will translate to respecting their dignity like throughout life. Do you think that there is a dehumanization even of born individuals at this point in our
Oh,
society?
absolutely. And that's where I'm like thinking about, what we were just saying of, oh gosh, I identify more left leaning, I would say. And I have nothing but love for, no matter where one stands politically, right?
Yeah.
There's so many different issues that need to be like not even just abortion, but to be respectful and to have empathy on all of these different issues.
Yeah.
But I just am more left leaning when it comes to um like anything other than abortion.
Yeah.
I'm pretty left leaning, I would say. And so it is like frustrating to an extent of when I hear like pro-choice people say, they just care about the baby until it's born. I
Mhm.
have to be like very honest and say like I don't blame them for thinking that way.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it has to be whole life. I would actually go back and change that and say that it's not even like we it's not we will see a transformation in how we respect human life like after birth if we respect it before birth because there's all these issues, but I would just
Yeah.
say everything's more intertwined, that
Yes.
everything has to be whole life. And so and it's very frustrating, and that's what I would say something that I do resonate with when it comes to understanding why people are pro-choice of like I feel that frustration with so many
Okay.
different issues, especially like when we talk about race and
Yeah.
ethnicity and like very sensitive
Yeah.
issues. So I can
Well,
feel that. Right.
yeah. I mean, moving on to like intersectionality, because you kind of touched on that a little bit at the end. Do you feel like being an Asian American woman has impacted your pro-life activism in any way? Is there like a certain way that people react to you, like seeing you as an Asian American woman doing pro-life activism? Is there any like ideas that you'd like to dispel, maybe like
Oh gosh. I
touching
would
on that
say
subject?
it's like so interesting because it goes back to like empathy and respect where it's so interesting because I will have like conversations with people and talk about my adoption and what China's one child policy and just as I'm now that I've gotten older kind of wanting to learn more about um my Asian roots and going back to China one day and
Mm,
being culturally immersed and being more educated and informed of, the Chinese culture. It's
yeah.
so like, it's very like people are very like receptive of that. But
Mm,
as soon as I mention that I'm pro-life, it like changes of
mm,
like, and it's like so like interesting almost of like, is my race being like tokenized? Of
yeah.
like, because I'm Asian, do you like want that perspective until I'm pro-life?
Yeah.
So it's like it's
Yeah.
so like, and I would even say too of even coming from it from the pro-life angle too. And I've talked to be honest, I don't really know a lot of Asian pro-life activists,
Yeah.
but I know a lot of pro-life activists who are Black. And
Yes.
they have, and it breaks my heart when they say that they felt tokenized in the pro-life movement of
Yes.
like, is their pro-life perspective only being valued because they are Black?
Yeah.
And I think it's like the issue of race is something that's got to be looked at from like both perspectives, even of that's like not okay either
Yeah.
way to like use that to like further your like cause or like to tokenize somebody.
Yeah. I think there's like a fine line to walk between like elevating voices of certain people and tokenizing those people. When you elevate
Yeah.
those voices, you are respecting their entire experience and their entire lived experience. I wanted to know, is there something that you wished, like kind of on this thread of like tokenization and how your identity impacts your activism and the spaces that you're in? Is there anything that you wish that non-Asian American and Pacific Islander pro-lifers knew about your experience as an AAPI person? It doesn't even have to be pro-life related, just, related to empathy. Is there
Oh
any?
gosh. Yeah. I would say, I think just from my like experience, and I've been, oh gosh, pro-life ever since I was like 15, but I would say I've been actively involved really since I was since that age, but really kind of as I've gotten older. I'm 28 now and matured and become more like educated and more involved with political advocacy. And just, immersing myself with all different political backgrounds and different perspectives. Oh gosh, I've just learned that not to like speak for someone else and like their experience. Like that's so unique to them and that's so personal. And I
Yeah,
feel like, oh gosh, I've been in the pro-life movement for like for more than a decade now.
yeah,
And from this is just, from what I've seen, and and then again, I'm only speaking from my personal experience. I think it's really great to see more like minority groups. And I don't always even like to use the word minority, but again, I can't think of a better word. But like those
yeah.
voices starting to become more like elevated inside
Mm,
and outside the pro-life movement is something that, I think we're making steps towards. But from my experience, a lot of the pro-lifers I do know are white, are Caucasian, and
mm,
that's okay. I'm not criticizing, but I think it's just that's something that we need to be aware of.
yeah,
And because I've never felt, I would say, personally tokenized, but I think at least from the pro-life perspective, but I've heard other people I've heard other people express that they have from the pro-life
yeah,
movement, and it breaks my heart. And it's so like, and at the end of the day, I can never truly like empathize in the respect of I am not like that person's like race or ethnicity, but also at
yeah,
the same time, you don't have to be to empathize. Like
yes,
empathy is you don't it's not have like empathy is does not equate to a shared experience. Empathy
exactly.
is like placing yourself in another's shoes
Yeah,
to like feel like to understand like maybe what they're feeling and
yeah,
walking with them. It doesn't have to be a shared experience, but in that
yeah,
regard, oh gosh, I would love to see more like AAPI representation in the pro-life movement. And it's so interesting because at Dems for Life, having, you know being Asian, and um we were actually going to, like, right before I left, we were going to start like an AAPI like committee
yeah,
essentially, and we could not find a lot of data on like abortion, particularly in the Asian community. Like I feel
yes,
like that's
yeah,
not really highlighted. Like I for sure can't even speak on that because I don't really have any information. And
yes,
so
yeah,
I would love for that, to be talked about more in in all the debate and discussion around abortion.
yeah,
I just
yeah,
have it,
yeah,
having our voices elevated, even like pro-choice and pro-life
yeah,
voices elevated. Because I for sure, I will say that, being Catholic, a lot of, um, there's a lot of like Vietnamese masses, especially when I was living in Southern California and even here being in the Phoenix area. There's a lot of Vietnamese masses, and even when there's like multicultural masses in Spanish, Vietnamese, and English, I have tend like I think especially Vietnamese Catholics tend to be more traditional, and so
mhm.
they are very pro-life in that regard. But I have to wonder of like just where like the AAPI community, like different voices of like where they stand on the abortion issue would be like very interesting. And I would love to
Yes.
have that elevated so we can have a conversation.
Yeah, I've noticed there is like a sparseness of data surrounding that, and it's kind of interesting because you think there's so many Asian American and Pacific Islander people here in the US. There's so many, I guess you could say, smaller communities of different people from different countries, but they're not even small. Like they're huge. Like here in Akron, we
Yeah.
have I'm gonna drop something that only Northeast Ohio people know, but North Hill, it's mainly people coming from places like the Philippines, Malaysia,
Mm,
Nepal,
mm,
India, and it's
yeah.
this huge community. And I've always wondered, like, is there an abortion center that specifically tries to cater to them? Are there specific cultural
Yeah.
values that might pull them away or lean them forward towards abortion? And like a lot of the information on that is just not there. So I totally agree with you. We need more
Yeah.
data to be able to
Yeah, like
understand
even
that.
just on where
Yeah.
people stand. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just have like not only that, but I know there's data
Mhm.
on like who's seeking abortion and who is getting abortions, and they break it down kind of by like race and ethnicity, and
Mhm.
I believe that the number for Asians is pretty low relatively compared to other races and ethnicities, but as far as like where people stand on the position, I'm
Yeah.
not able to like kind of gauge, and that's an
Yes.
important place to start
Yeah.
when we have these conversations. So I don't know, I think like I would just say on a different, pro-life issue. And I think like we were saying, everything is so interconnected. So I
Yeah.
like to say like whole life, and that's the DFLA in me speaking. But everything like
Yeah.
it's not just abortion, right? There's mental health, there's like so many different aspects. But that actually is becoming more talked about in the AAPI community, mental health. And
Yeah.
that is 100% a whole life issue that needs our attention and needs
Yeah.
awareness and action. I think, especially in the AAPI community, especially for like immigrants, and if you're like a first generation like um Asian child, that mental health is very like stigmatized. But I
Yeah.
think now it's finally starting to be talked about more, which is
Okay.
great on
Yeah, that's
another like
amazing.
angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. That is a whole life issue, and it's honestly very good to hear that that's being talked about more, not just in all communities, specifically in the AAPI community. I'm sure that has to have some type of impact on how people might be viewing abortion going forward,
Yeah.
especially after Roe v. Wade. I did want to ask you, how do you think that the pro-life movement, what would you like to see us doing moving forward from Roe v. Wade? What changes would you like to see us make?
Oh gosh, there's so many. And like, I think that's the first thing, is to acknowledge how much work we have to do. I
Mhm.
think like a lot of us maybe have the tendency, oh, Roe v. Wade has been overturned. Like that's all that matters here. No, it's not all that matters. Like we're not going to get anywhere if we're not like being a whole life, and
Yeah.
then be like, you, no matter like where abortion policy is in each state, we lack the infrastructure, even if abortion is limited and regulated or even permitted in the third trimester. No matter
Yeah.
like what the policy is, things are not good. Like, no, absolutely not. There's so much work to be done, especially in states where abortion is limited and regulated.
Yeah.
Women and parents have always needed our support before and during Roe v. Wade, and they need it now. Like nothing has
Yeah.
changed. If anything, the the need for resources and support is much greater. And
Yeah.
so like that's what people need to understand, is with all the noise around the legality of abortion, we're
Mhm.
hushing so many voices, especially those who are underserved and underprivileged.
Yes.
And that in this case, it's usually people who are in minorities, like who are in minority communities, like
Yeah.
AAPI communities. People like
Especially
it's
people
just
who have like immigration status that is
right.
questionable. Like there's a lot going on that can affect that. So I completely agree
And
with
they're
you.
being hushed with all
Yes.
this noise.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, yes, protecting the legality of the preborn is a priority and needs to be our priority. I will
Yeah.
never back away from that, and I will always stand firm in that as a person in the pro-life movement. But it's like gotten so loud that we're not even like addressing the true roots of abortion and the true like problems. And that's often financial insecurity.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that's a very reasonable perspective. And a lot of people like to have it one way or the other, but I appreciate that you're looking at both of those very important aspects of, okay, we do need to focus on making sure that abortion is not seen as a respectable or good thing to do, and obviously protecting human lives legally, but
Right,
also
right.
creating resources and elevating voices so that we can bring peace to these communities so that there's not so much of a need, you know, a need to have to take
Yeah,
members out of our communities. So
yes.
I think that's a really amazing perspective to have. I notice you're kind of young. I'm younger than you, so like that sounds a little patronizing, but I mean like you're a young adult, you're a young woman. And you
Right.
said you've been in the pro-life movement for over 10 years, you said,
Oh
at
gosh,
this
like really
point?
when I was like 16 is like when I became
Yeah.
involved.
Okay,
But
so
like
like what,
really truly involved probably like the last couple of years.
yeah. Well, I mean, having that expertise, what would you recommend to young pro-lifers stepping into like similar shoes as you did, just coming into the movement, maybe just finding out what abortion was, trying to figure out how they can fit in and what they can do to help the cause? Like, what advice would you give them?
Oh gosh. I would say for me, I since I went to a Catholic school and faith is so beautiful and I would never discourage anyone, who is religious to ever hide that. And
Yeah.
I certainly don't hide that. But something that I wish was more like emphasized is the pro-life movement is so much larger than that. And it took me a while to kind of like I don't want to say like break away from it, but be able to tell people why I'm pro-life without using my faith. I
Yeah.
think is so, 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 so important. So I think my advice to like young people is to like really broaden your horizon
Mm,
and, study biology, study ethics, study philosophy, because a lot of the times when like you're having interactions with people, they're not going
mm.
to really resonate with faith. And even if
Yeah.
they do, that is so personal.
Yeah.
So I I wish that if like talking like going back to 16-year-old and even like college me of being like life begins at conception, like it's a life and like using Bible verses, that's beautiful. But like at
Yeah.
the not everyone like resonates with that.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly important to be able to um know like why you're pro-life, but like and speaking with conviction and don't hide your faith, but also like
Yeah.
go beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really
I think it's
mature
incredibly
perspective to
important.
have. I think that is a lot of people. Here's the thing. I'm very pro-faith personally. I'm not speaking for PAAU. PAAU is a secular organization, guys, but I'm very
Right.
pro-faith. And like me as a decolonized Christian, I have a lot of conversations with people about abortion, where they bring like colonization into it. And they say, like, oh, well, only Christians view life from this like beginning, like in this way, having value from the very beginning. But if I came from it from just my perspective as a Christian and not added, I guess you could say, the broader understanding of being decolonized and trying to understand that there are different perspectives on these things out there, I wouldn't know how to have conversations with people where I just describe the ethics of like, okay, this is a human being. It has these qualities from the beginning. It
Right.
follows these scientific concepts, and here's why
Right.
their life matters from like a philosophical standpoint. You know what
Right.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm glad
Yeah.
that, you're encouraging people to not lie about their faith, not shy away from it, but still, like you said, broaden their horizons and be able to speak,
Right.
yeah, to multiple different understandings of the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And at the end of the day too, I think even from a Catholic standpoint, it's rooted in biology, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's from like, oh gosh, I don't know who conducted the study, but it's a credible source. So, oh gosh, I'm like blanking, but it's 96% of biologists agree that human life begins at conception. Now,
Mhm.
granted, this comes in, they're not saying personhood, right?
Yeah.
So, like, in that regard, that's, that's a different topic. That's like
Yeah.
philosophy and ethics with personhood. But biologically, a human life begins at conception, right? It's
Yeah.
it's alive, and it's Homo sapien, right? So it's a
Yeah.
human life.
Yeah.
But I think like, and that's where I think that's the basis of everything that we're talking about, of
Yeah.
religious or not religious. It's a human life.
Yeah.
We're
And
not,
like, yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Like
sorry.
motherhood is so
Yeah.
beautiful. And like I always, and that's another thing too, of there's so many different ways to like advocate for the pro-life movement. So for some it is saying like I'm a mother and motherhood is so beautiful,
Mm.
or like women deserve better than abortion. Like those are like, that can resonate with certain people, but at the end of the day, we are pro-life because it's a human life.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the root of it. And so I really like encourage people to really focus on that and to explore that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's going to get you further. Yeah. Because everyone can
Yeah.
like, when I like go up to a pro-choice woman and I say women deserve better than abortion, like I can give like statistics of and back it up with, well, abortion is
Yeah.
a reflection that we're not meeting the needs of women, considering that 73% of women, according to Guttmacher Institute, seek abortion because of economic hardship. Right.
Yeah.
So like from that regard, I can say women deserve better than abortion, when abortion is not meeting that need.
Yes.
But like at the same time, like using science and biology
Yeah.
and like facts like is gonna get you much further.
Yeah. I think it's kind of hard, honestly, to separate the idea of personhood from humanity, like intrinsically.
Yeah.
And so like I always like to challenge people in that way. Would you say that you like to kind of understand where people are coming from when they think personhood comes in and meets with humanity? Or do
Yeah, and I'm
you,
like, is it
yeah,
viability? Like,
yeah,
and personally, like outlining it, is this personhood begin for you at birth? Does it begin at viability? Like, when
yeah,
does it begin? And then I always like, if they say like viability, for instance, I say then, okay, well, what makes what, you know, why viability? And then they say like, or consciousness or whatever it is. And
yeah.
then I say, well, a born person who's unconscious, like, what do we say about that? And like
Mhm.
their life and like their value. So there's like, it leads to, personhood is, oh gosh, an entirely different like topic. But at the end of the day, too, like throughout history, we've seen personhood be completely subjective.
Yeah.
And like it can't be like where an individual decides on when personhood begins. It's such a slippery slope. And
Yes.
like you can go into throughout our history of like the different
Yeah.
dehumanization that's happened throughout, oh gosh, decades and the centuries.
Yeah.
So I always like take it from that approach too, of just look at our nation's history and like when we've determined personhood.
Yeah. When we've separated personhood from humanity, it's
Yeah,
never turned
yeah,
out well. You're not on the
yeah.
right side of history typically, or just always.
No, no. It's
So,
such a slippery slope. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I want to know, since the people watching this will 9 times out of 10 like you because you're likable and awesome. How can they personally support you as an activist? How can they support your activism? Would you like to shout out any of your social medias or any ways of giving? You can just do that right now if you want.
Oh, sure. I used to work at Dems for Life, but I'm not officially working for them, but I'm still very much involved. So definitely go check them out. Go check out Equal Rights Institute, Secular Pro-Life when it comes to biology, ethics, and philosophy. They're much
Yeah,
more equipped and eloquent than I am.
you're
And no
eloquent.
pressure at all, but I do I do have my personal like Instagram and TikTok. It's Joyful Just Catholic, and it kind of goes back to me like expanding beyond my faith. But if that resonates with you, feel free to follow it. I do like make pro-life content that is from like a secular angle. So if you're
Yeah.
interested, definitely go check it out.
Yeah, and I mean anybody in the audience who happens to be an atheist, it never hurts to just get perspective. And I know you said you do secular stuff, but I've noticed you do things about your faith, and faith is
Mm-hmm.
beautiful in my opinion and Pal's opinion, even though we're a secular organization. I gotta say that again.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
definitely don't be afraid to go check out her page, no matter where you're coming from. Thank you so much, Jess. It was amazing talking to you. You have such wonderful perspective. We'd love to talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.